You picture the world's largest army marching. Endless spears, endless banners, endless soldiers. One king, one goal, total conquest. It looks unstoppable. It looks glorious. This was Xerxes' invasion of Greece, 480 BCE, the largest army ever assembled. Ancient writers claimed millions of soldiers. Here's the problem nobody talks about. An army that big doesn't fight first. It starves first, unless someone plans ahead. Beating this force was the real war, and it started years before any battle. That's not the story you were taught. So let's talk about what actually happened. Because the math alone is brutal. Herodotus claimed over 5 million people. Historians today think that's wildly exaggerated. Modern estimates land near 200,000 to 300,000. Still, that number is staggering for 480 BCE. No ancient city held that many people. So how do you feed a moving city? Let's start with the daily food math. One soldier needs about 2 pounds of grain daily. Multiply that by 200,000 mouths every single day. That's roughly 400,000 pounds of grain daily. And that's before counting animals at all. Pack animals and cavalry horses needed feed too. Tens of thousands of animals, each eating daily. Add water, now the problem gets worse. An army this size could drink rivers dry. Ancient sources say exactly that happened. Some rivers reportedly ran dry from the crossing. That's not a battle detail. That's logistics failing. So Xerxes couldn't just march and hope. He had to plan this years in advance. Here's what nobody tells you about the buildup. Persian officials built supply depots along the entire route, years before the army ever arrived there. Grain, salted meat, and wine stockpiled ahead. This wasn't improvisation. This was infrastructure. Local populations were ordered to contribute food. Some regions were financially crushed by the demand. Herodotus describes towns bankrupted feeding the march. That's the hidden cost of world's largest army. Now let's talk about moving all this food. Grain doesn't walk itself to the front. Thousands of wagons and pack animals carried supplies. A fleet of supply ships followed the coastline too. Ships could carry more faster than wagons, so the army stayed close to the shore. That decision wasn't strategy, it was survival. Here's where the engineering gets extreme. The army had to cross the Hellespont Strait, so Persian engineers built a bridge of boats. Hundreds of ships lashed together with rope. The first attempt was destroyed by a storm, so they built it again, even stronger. This wasn't for soldiers to walk across quickly. It also had to carry endless supply wagons. One bridge, one bottleneck, one massive risk. Then there's the canal at Mount Athos. Persian workers dug a channel through solid land. Why cut through a mountain at all? A previous fleet had wrecked rounding that cape. Losing ships meant losing food and men, so they rerouted the sea itself instead. That's the scale of planning this required. Now let's talk about who actually managed this. This wasn't one general's job, it was a system. Officials tracked grain, water sources, and campsites ahead. Scouts rode ahead to confirm each depot was ready. If a depot failed, the whole march stalled. That's the trap of moving this many people. One missing shipment could ripple for days. So before the army even reached Greece, the real battle was already being fought. Not with swords, with sacks of grain. Now here's the part that catches people off guard. This army also had to pay itself. Soldiers expected wages, not just rations. Multiply modest daily wages across hundreds of thousands. The Persian treasury bled money every single day. That gap is where empires got dangerously stretched. So the march wasn't just slow, it was expensive. Now let's talk about what happens when it breaks. Because eventually, the system did break down. After the invasion stalled, supply lines grew thin. Local food sources were already stripped bare. Soldiers began foraging just to survive. That's not what world's largest army sounds like. The retreat after defeat was even worse. Ancient accounts describe starvation during the withdrawal. Disease spread fast through exhausted, hungry ranks. The very system that built the march collapsed. That sounds like a footnote. It is not. More soldiers may have died from hunger than battle. That's the uncomfortable truth behind the legend. Historians still debate the exact numbers lost. But the pattern across history repeats constantly. Massive armies rarely fall to swords first. They fall to broken supply chains. So why does this keep getting forgotten? Because feeding an army isn't dramatic on paper. There's no dramatic charge, no clashing swords. Just endless wagons, depots, and careful math. But that math decided the entire campaign. Every mile marched had a cost behind it. Every soldier fed meant someone else went without. That's the invisible price of ancient conquest. Now let's zoom out and see the full picture. This invasion needed years of advanced planning. It needed engineered bridges and dug canals. It needed hundreds of pre-built storehouses. It needed a fleet just to keep pace. It needed local towns stripped of resources. And even then, it barely held together. That's not weakness, that's the reality of scale. The bigger the army, the more fragile it gets. Size wasn't the advantage everyone assumes it was. Size was also the single biggest liability. So next time you hear largest army ever, don't picture glory, picture grain sacks. Picture wagons, depots, and desperate quartermasters. Picture rivers drained dry by thirst alone. Picture treasuries bleeding coins every single day. That's the real story behind the legend. Not a myth of endless, effortless power. A brutal, fragile system that barely worked. And when it worked, empires reshaped history. When it failed, empires lost everything. That's the real weight behind every ancient march. Not the size of the army alone, but the invisible chain feeding every soldier in it. One weak link and the whole thing suffers. That's true for Xerxes' army in 480 BCE. And it's true for nearly every massive army since. Rome, the Mongols, Napoleon, all faced this same wall. Feeding soldiers is harder than commanding them. That's the pattern this channel keeps uncovering. History's biggest forces run on the smallest details. Grain counts, water counts, wagons count. Glory is what gets remembered afterward. Logistics is what actually decided the outcome. So the world's largest army wasn't fed by luck. It was fed by years of brutal planning. By engineers, officials, villagers, and endless wagons. And even then, it barely held the line. That's the story behind the myth. Not glory, grain, not legend, logistics. And now you know how it really worked.